The dead husband's secret. My daughter-in-law's phone rang that autumn morning, and it was the number of my husband who died 6 years ago. When I found my daughter-in-law's phone ringing that autumn morning, I could never have imagined that this small device would hold the secret that would destroy my entire family. Trembling, I looked at the illuminated screen and saw my husband's photo, dead for over 6 years, smiling with a message that read, "Thursday, same time. I can't wait to see you again." It was as if the world stopped spinning and the air in my lungs froze. That Tuesday morning had begun like any other. Autumn in the North Carolina mountains painted the trees with gold and red colors, and the cold breeze announced that winter would soon knock on our door. Keisha, my daughter-in-law, had come to have breakfast with me as she did every Tuesday since Marcus's death, a tradition she maintained religiously, something I'd always interpreted as an act of compassion, a way of not leaving me alone in this house too large for a 68-year-old widow. "I'm going to the supermarket quickly, Lorraine," she said after coffee, grabbing her purse. "I need to buy some things for tonight's dinner. Do you want me to bring you anything?" I shook my head, thanking her for her kindness, as I always did. Keisha was too perfect, hair always arranged, makeup impeccable even for a simple breakfast, clothes that seemed straight from a magazine. My son Jamal was so lucky, I always thought, or at least that's what I believed. 15 minutes after her departure, I heard the sound, an insistent buzzing coming from the dresser near the front door. Her phone had been left behind. Wasn't my business, of course. I was never one to meddle in other people's lives, much less in someone's privacy. But the phone rang again, more insistently. Keisha must be expecting an important call, I thought, walking toward the dresser to check. That's when I saw it, Marcus's face illuminating the screen. My husband, dead for over 6 years, there, alive on my daughter-in-law's phone. And it wasn't an old photo taken when he was still alive. It was Marcus in a blue shirt I'd never seen, in a place I didn't recognize. My hands trembled as I picked up the phone. The previous message read, "Thursday, same time. I can't wait to see you again." The world around me began to spin. I felt the blood freeze in my veins as my brain struggled to process what I was seeing. How could there be a recent photo of my dead husband? How could he be sending messages to Keisha? Was this some kind of sick joke? I shouldn't have done it. I knew I shouldn't. Respect had always been a pillar in my life, but something stronger drove me. I unlocked the phone. Keisha always used my grandson's birth date as her password, something I had observed countless times. The messaging app opened, revealing a long sequence of conversations with someone identified only as Amy M. I began to swipe the screen, my hands trembling, my heart pounding in my chest as if it wanted to escape. "Thank you for yesterday. You're incredible. I miss your touch. Jamal is getting suspicious. We need to be more careful. The old woman suspects nothing. She was never very smart anyway." The old woman. They were talking about me. I continued scrolling up to older messages. 2 years of conversations, 3, 4, 5. The first messages dated from 6 months before Marcus's death. My husband and my daughter-in-law. The man I loved for 4 decades and the woman my son adored. Reality hit me like a punch in the stomach. They were having an affair. Marcus and Keisha were having an affair. But that made no sense. Marcus was dead. So who was sending these messages to Keisha? Who was using my husband's photo? I scrolled up further, searching for answers, and found photos, dozens of them. Marcus and Keisha together in a rustic cabin overlooking a lake, embraced, smiling, happy in a way I hadn't seen Marcus in years before his death. The dates on the back of each photo made me gasp. The most recent was from just a week ago. A wave of nausea overcame me. It wasn't possible, unless... That's when I heard the sound of a car in the driveway. Keisha was back. I quickly placed the phone exactly where I'd found it and returned to the kitchen. My heart beating so hard I thought she could hear it. I breathed deeply, trying to control my face, my hands, my breathing. I couldn't let her know that I knew, not until I understood what the hell was happening. The door opened. "Lorraine, I think I forgot my phone here," she called with that perfectly polished voice. "It's on the dresser," I responded, amazed by the calmness in my voice. As I heard her steps approaching the kitchen, I tried to process the whirlwind of thoughts. My husband had an affair with my daughter-in-law, but he was dead. So who was impersonating him? Who was using his photo? And why was Keisha continuing to respond as if it was really him? "Ah, it's here," she said, appearing in the kitchen doorway with the phone in her hand, that perfect smile that now seemed like a grotesque mask. It would be a disaster to be without it today. I watched her face, searching for signs of nervousness, guilt, anything that would betray the secret I now knew. But there was nothing. Keisha was a perfect actress. "Are you sure you don't need anything from the supermarket?" she asked, putting her phone in her purse. "I'm sure," I replied, trying to smile. "Drive carefully." As soon as the door closed behind her, I collapsed in the kitchen chair. The world I knew had just crumbled. My husband, the man with whom I shared an entire life, had betrayed me with my own daughter-in-law. And now, years after his death, someone was continuing that sickening game. I needed to discover the truth, however painful it might be. I needed to know who was behind this. For me, for Jamal, for our family. But how do I start? Who could I turn to? Who would believe an elderly widow with an absurd story about messages coming from the dead? I was alone in this search for truth, but one thing I knew for certain. Next Thursday, I would discover who was meeting with Keisha, and then, finally, I would understand what had happened to my family. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of Marcus's face on Keisha's phone screen haunted me every time I closed my eyes. How had I not noticed anything during all these years? They were right under my nose the whole time, and I, blind with trust, never suspected. Thursdays were when Marcus said he was going bowling with his friends, an activity that began shortly before he became ill. "It's good for me, Lorraine," he used to say. "The doctor told me I need to move more for my heart." And I, as the devoted wife I always was, just smiled and wished him to have fun. Now everything made sense. There was no bowling. There was Keisha. There was betrayal. The next morning, my son Jamal called. His voice sounded tired, as it always did in recent years. After Marcus's death, he had taken over the administration of the family property, a responsibility he never really desired. "Mom, I'm going to pick up some documents from Dad's office. Do you need anything from the city?" I hesitated for a moment. Could I tell him what I discovered? No, it would be premature. I needed concrete evidence, not just messages on a phone that I saw without permission. "No, honey, I'm fine." When I hung up, an idea occurred to me. Marcus's office. If there was more evidence about this matter, it would be there. He was always methodical. He kept everything. Perhaps there was something that could help me understand who was impersonating him. I went down to the basement where the office was. Jamal rarely touched his father's personal things, preferring to use only what was necessary to manage the property. Everything else remained untouched, like a dusty sanctuary of a life that no longer existed. The key to the bottom drawer was still hidden behind the picture on the wall. Marcus was always predictable with his hiding places. Inside the drawer, I found what I expected: Organized folders, old documents, some letters. Nothing incriminating at first glance. But then, hidden under a pile of bank statements, I saw a small wooden box I'd never seen before. My heart raced as I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were photographs. Not the family photos that decorated our house, but images of Keisha and Marcus together in a rustic cabin with a view of a lake, embraced, smiling, happy in a way I hadn't seen Marcus in years before his death. On the back of each photo, dates written in his handwriting. The most recent was 3 weeks before his death. At the bottom of the box, I found an envelope. Inside, a deed. The cabin at Lake Jordan hadn't been sold as Marcus had told me. He had kept it secret, a nest for his encounters with Keisha. I wanted to scream, break things, burn those photos. But the pain transformed into something colder, more calculated. I needed to know who was continuing this charade, who was impersonating my dead husband. I put everything back, except for one of the photos that I put in my pocket. Evidence for myself, to not doubt what I had discovered in case Payne tried to convince me that everything was nothing more than a terrible deception. When Jamal arrived a few hours later, I managed to maintain my composure. I watched him search for the documents he needed, wondering if he knew, if it was possible that my own son was aware of his wife's affair with his father. No, I couldn't believe that. Jamal was always honest, upright, like Marcus used to be, or like I thought he was. "Did you find what you were looking for?" I asked when he finished. "Yes, just some old deeds. We're thinking of selling that lot at the north end. You know? We're not using it and the offer is good." I nodded as if I cared about lots of land and business at that moment. "Mom, are you okay? You seem distant." I forced a smile. "Just a bad night's sleep. You know how hard this time of year is for me?" It was October, close to the anniversary of Marcus's death. Jamal nodded understandingly. How easy it was to lie when people already had a ready-made explanation for your behavior. "Keisha sends her greetings," he said, as he prepared to leave. "She's busy with a landscaping project for the Williams family. That's why she hasn't come as much." More lies. She wasn't coming because she was busy meeting the ghost of my husband somewhere. After Jamal left, I decided I couldn't wait until Thursday. I needed to go to the cabin now, see with my own eyes this place that had been the scene of so much betrayal. The address was in the deed I found. Lake Jordan, about 40 minutes by car from here. I took the keys to my old Ford and left before losing my nerve. The road to the lake wound through pines and mountains, gradually moving away from civilization, the kind of place where secrets can flourish without witnesses. When I finally found the entrance to the property, marked only by an unmarked mailbox, my stomach was in knots. The cabin was exactly like in the photos, small, rustic, with a porch facing the lake. It looked straight out of a postcard, the kind of place where lovers come to escape the world, the kind of place my husband chose to betray everything we built together. There were no parked cars. Apparently no one was there. I approached slowly, prepared to invent an excuse if someone appeared. I climbed the porch steps and looked through the windows. The interior was impeccably clean and organized. It didn't look abandoned, but there were no obvious signs of recent occupancy either. I tried the door, locked, as I expected. I hadn't brought the cabin key, if it was among Marcus's things. For a moment I considered breaking a window, but that would reveal my presence. I needed to be smarter. I circled, though, cabin looking for another entrance, and found a window in the back that seemed less secure. With a little pressure, it opened. I didn't recognize myself in that moment. Lorraine Washington, 68 years old, invading a property like a criminal. But I had crossed so many lines since I saw that message on Keisha's phone that one more wouldn't make a difference. The interior of the cabin was surprisingly cozy. A small living room with a fireplace, a modest kitchen, a bedroom with a queen bed made with bedding that seemed too expensive for a place like that. Everywhere, signs of recent occupancy. A half-finished bottle of wine in the kitchen, current magazines on the coffee table, a woman's coat thrown over a chair. In the bedroom, I opened the closet and found clothes, men's and women's clothes. Among them, I recognized some of Keisha's garments, and then I froze. Hanging on the men's side of the closet were shirts I instantly recognized. Marcus's shirts. Not just similar, but exactly the same ones he wore, even a blue plaid shirt that I myself had bought him on our last Christmas together. How was that possible? I was certain that all of Marcus's clothes had been donated after his death. I myself had separated everything, crying over each piece as I placed them in boxes. With trembling hands, I touched the familiar fabric. The sensation awakened memories. Marcus wearing that shirt while cutting wood. Marcus smiling while I adjusted the collar. Marcus lying, betraying, destroying our life together. Something caught my attention on the nightstand, an overturned picture frame. I picked it up and felt my blood freeze. It was a recent photograph, no more than a few weeks old, judging by the autumn foliage visible through the window in the background. It showed Keisha smiling, embraced with a man who was impossibly similar to Marcus, older than at the time of his death, with more wrinkles around his eyes, more gray hair at the temples, but unmistakably Marcus, or someone who could be his identical twin. But Marcus had no brothers. He was an only child, as was I. There was no close relative who could be mistaken for him. So who was this man, and why was he impersonating my dead husband? The sound of a car approaching pulled me from my trance. Someone was arriving. In panic, I placed the photograph back exactly as I'd found it and ran to the living room. Through the window, I saw an unfamiliar car parking. A man got out with his back to me, carrying shopping bags. I couldn't be seen there. I ran toward the back window where I'd entered and exited as quietly as possible. I circled the cabin, staying crouched, and managed to reach my car unnoticed. With my heart pounding, I drove back down the dirt road until I was at a safe distance. I stopped on the shoulder, my hands shaking so much I could barely grip the steering wheel. What I had seen defied all logic. A man who looked like Marcus, wearing Marcus's clothes, living a secret life with my grandson's mother. As I tried to regain my composure, a terrible possibility began to form in my mind. What if Marcus wasn't really dead? What if his entire death had been staged? But no, I saw him in the casket. I touched his cold hand, watched them lower his body into the grave, unless it wasn't him. I felt the world spin around me as the truth began to take shape, a truth more terrible than anything I could have imagined. The next morning arrived without me having slept a single minute. I spent the entire night turning over the last 5 years in my mind, examining every detail, every memory of the days preceding Marcus's supposed death. He had died at home from a sudden heart attack. I was in the city shopping. When I returned, I found him collapsed in the office. It was Keisha who called the ambulance while I, in shock, held his cold hand. Keisha, who coincidentally had stopped by to drop off some documents that Jamal had asked for. Keisha, who managed the entire situation with an almost clinical efficiency, while I fell apart. I remembered the funeral, the closed casket. He wouldn't like people seeing him this way, the funeral director had said. At the time it seemed sensible. Now it sounded like part of a terrible conspiracy. A fixed idea began to take hold of me. I needed to see Marcus's grave. I needed to be sure there was actually something or someone buried there. I dressed mechanically and took the car keys. It was early. The sun had barely risen, and the road to the cemetery was deserted. Dew still covered the headstones when I parked and walked to the place where my husband supposedly rested. Marcus Dwayne Washington, 1950, 20 beloved husband, father, and grandfather. I stood there looking at the cold marble, feeling foolish. What did I expect to find? An empty grave? A note saying, "I fooled you"? The truth is that even if I wanted to, I couldn't simply dig up the casket to verify its contents. On the way home, I decided to make a detour. I parked in front of Detective Johnson's police station, a man we'd known for years. If there was anyone in this town I could trust, it was him. Johnson received me in his cluttered office, offering me coffee in a cup that desperately needed washing. "What can I help you with, Lorraine? Problems with the property?" "Actually, it's something a little unusual," I began without knowing exactly how to explain. "Hypothetically speaking, how would someone go about, well, faking their own death?" Johnson raised his eyebrows. "That's a very specific question to be hypothetical." "It's just curiosity. I've been reading a lot of police novels lately," I lied, trying to sound casual. "Well, it's not as easy as the movies make it look," he responded, leaning back in his chair. "You need a death certificate, which requires a corrupt or deceived doctor. You need a body or a convincing explanation for its absence. And then you have the whole question of documents, social security, identity. But is it possible? Possible, yes, easy, not by a long shot." He studied me carefully. "Lorraine, are you sure everything's okay?" "Yes, just research for a book club," I replied quickly, standing up. "Thanks for your time, Detective." As I left the station, I knew I was about to cross a dangerous line. What I was about to do would put me at risk, but I saw no alternative. I needed to know the truth. At the hardware store, I bought a small wireless security camera of the type used to monitor vacation homes. The salesman explained how to set it up and connect it to my phone. It wasn't exactly James Bond, but it would serve my purpose. That afternoon, I returned to the cabin. The car I'd seen the day before was no longer there. Moving quickly, I entered through the same back window and installed the camera in a discreet place in the living room where it would have a good view of the entrance and part of the interior. The battery would last about 48 hours, enough time to discover who would come on Thursday. As I left, I noticed something I'd overlooked in my rushed visit the day before: a small medicine box in the bathroom cabinet. Heart medications prescribed to someone named Malcolm Davis, a pseudonym so close to Marcus Dwayne that it seemed almost brazen. I returned home with growing certainty that I was about to uncover something terrible. On Wednesday, I received a call from Jamal. He and Keisha would come to dinner the next day, Thursday. I felt a chill run down my spine. "What time do you think you'll come?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Around 7, if that works for you." 7 o'clock, which meant Keisha's secret meeting would be earlier. What if the man who looked like Marcus was planning to come to dinner too? Would they be so bold, or would she simply make an excuse to leave later? "Of course, I'm going to prepare something special," I replied, my mind racing with possibilities. That night, I compulsively checked the camera app on my phone. Nothing yet. The cabin remained empty and silent. Thursday morning, I received a notification. Someone had entered the cabin. With trembling fingers, I opened the app and saw the images. It was Keisha carrying a small suitcase. She moved through the cabin with the familiarity of someone who was home, arranging flowers, lighting candles, setting the stage for an encounter. About an hour later, the door opened again. The man who entered made my heart stop. Tall, gray hair, a walk I would recognize anywhere, if it weren't impossible. I would swear it was Marcus. Keisha ran to embrace him, kissing him deeply. They spoke for a few minutes, but the camera's audio was too weak to capture their words. Then, hand in hand, they headed to the bedroom, moving out of the camera's reach. I felt nausea rise in my throat. Even after seeing the messages, the photographs, part of me still hoped there would be some innocent explanation. Now there was no way to deny it. But who was that man? Why did he look so much like Marcus? And what was Keisha's role in all of this? I needed to confront them. I couldn't keep living with these doubts consuming me from within. I took my car and drove to the cabin, determined to finally discover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. When I arrived, I saw Keisha's car parked next to a truck I didn't recognize. For a moment, sitting in my car, I considered calling Jamal or Detective Johnson. But what would I say? That I suspected my dead husband was having an affair with my daughter-in-law? They would find me completely insane. I needed to face this alone. I got out of the car and walked to the cabin. I could hear soft music coming from inside. Al Green, Marcus's favorite music. My heart was beating so hard I thought it could tear through my chest. With one last moment of hesitation, I knocked on the door. The music stopped abruptly. Silence. Then footsteps approaching. The door opened, and there he was. The man from the photographs. The man who looked so much like Marcus that for a hallucinatory moment, I believed my husband had returned from the dead. But looking more carefully, I noticed small differences. A scar above his right eyebrow that Marcus didn't have, wrinkles slightly deeper around his mouth, hair a shade darker than Marcus's. His face paled when he saw me. It wasn't the reaction of a stranger surprised by an unexpected visit. It was the look of someone who saw a ghost. "Your ghost, Lorraine," he murmured, his voice almost identical to Marcus's, but with a slightly different intonation. He knew my name. Before I could respond, Keisha appeared behind him, wearing only an oversized shirt, one of Marcus's shirts I had recognized in the closet. Her face transformed from surprise to horror when she saw me. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I think I should be asking you that," I replied, surprisingly calm. "Who are you?" I directed the question at the man. He opened his mouth to respond, but Keisha interrupted him. "Lorraine, you need to leave now. This isn't something you want to know." "Actually, it's exactly what I want to know. I'm tired of lies. Who is this man? And why is he wearing my dead husband's clothes? Why is he impersonating Marcus?" The man and Keisha exchanged glances, a silent communication that only increased my rage. "You better come in," he said finally, stepping aside. I entered the cabin, feeling strangely disconnected from reality, as if I was attending a play where I'd suddenly become an unrehearsed character. "I'm going to get dressed," Keisha murmured, disappearing into the bedroom. I was left alone with the stranger who had my husband's face. He watched me with a complex expression: fear, guilt, something like compassion. "Who are you?" I repeated. "My name is Malcolm," he answered, his voice low. "Malcolm Washington. I was Marcus's twin brother." I felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. Impossible. Marcus had no brothers. He was an only child. Malcolm gave a sad smile. "That's what he always said, isn't it? Marcus was always good at reinventing his past as needed." I knew his parents. They never mentioned another son. Because they didn't know about me. He sat on the sofa, gesturing for me to do the same. I remained standing. "We were separated at birth, closed adoption. I grew up in Detroit with my adoptive parents. I only discovered Marcus 6 years ago." 6 years. A year before Marcus died. The chronology matched, but it was all so absurd that my mind struggled to process it. How did you find him? I didn't find him. He found me. Malcolm took a deep breath. I had cancer. I needed a bone marrow transplant. The doctors suggested searching for biological relatives. When the search results came back, I discovered I had an identical twin brother, Marcus. Keisha returned, now fully dressed, her face a mask of forced calm. You met each other, I continued, trying to piece things together. And then what? Marcus found me, Malcolm continued. At first it was incredible, you know? Finding someone so much like me, not just physically. We had the same gestures, the same tastes. Even our medical histories were similar. Except for the cancer, I observed. Yes, except for that. We talked a lot on the phone. We started visiting each other. That's when I met Keisha. I looked at my daughter-in-law, now pale but holding her chin up. You betrayed my husband with the uncle he didn't even know existed. It's not that simple, she answered, her voice cold. Then explain it. Make it simple for me. Malcolm gave Keisha a warning look. We're going to tell her everything. She deserves to know. Keisha crossed her arms but nodded. Marcus donated bone marrow to me, Malcolm continued. He saved my life. But while I was recovering, something changed in him. He started talking about how dissatisfied he was with his life, how he felt he'd made wrong decisions, married the wrong person, chosen the wrong path. I felt a sharp pain in my chest at those words. Marcus had never shown dissatisfaction with me, or at least I thought he hadn't. He had a wife, a son, a grandson, a property he loved. How was that the wrong path? Malcolm looked genuinely uncomfortable. I can't explain his feelings. I only know what he told me, that he felt trapped, that he wanted freedom. And then he met Keisha. The picture finally clicked into place. You're saying, the husband of his own son, I concluded. Keisha stepped forward. I didn't plan to fall in love with Marcus. It happened. Jamal and I had already grown distant years ago. We only stayed together for Deshawn. The coldness in her voice frightened me. There was no remorse, just a statement of facts. We began an affair, she continued. We would meet here on Thursdays. And then you decided to get rid of him, I said to Malcolm. Fake his death. Assume my husband's identity so you could keep his woman. Malcolm shook his head vehemently. No, that wasn't it. I wasn't even around when Marcus died. I was in remission but still recovering in Detroit. So he really did die? Yes, answered Keisha. From a heart attack, exactly as you believe, just not as sudden as it seemed. What do you mean? Keisha took a deep breath. Marcus had been planning to leave us, to leave you, Jamal, the life he had. He wanted to sell the property, start over somewhere with me. The betrayal was so profound I could barely breathe. What happened? Did he change his mind? He had the first minor heart attack while he was with me, she continued. We managed to hide it. The doctor said he needed to reduce stress, take his medication, but he became obsessed with the idea of leaving soon. He said life was too short, so he started planning an exit. Malcolm interrupted. He contacted me again. He proposed something absurd, that I assume his identity after he died. He said he had substantial life insurance that he could split with me. I refused, he continued. I said he was crazy. I said if he wanted to leave his family, he should just ask for a divorce like a normal person. But Marcus, he didn't want to deal with the scandal, with the division of assets. He just wanted to disappear and start over. But he died before he could do that, I concluded. Yes, confirmed Keisha. That day he really did have a heart attack, just not taking his medications correctly. Perhaps on purpose. I'll never know. I felt nausea rise in my throat. You found him dead? Yes. He had called me earlier saying he didn't feel well. When I arrived, he was on the office floor. He was already gone. A terrible thought occurred to me. You could have saved him if you'd called for help immediately. Keisha avoided my gaze. The answer was clear in her silence. And afterward, I said, you panicked. Yes, she admitted. I knew that if they investigated, they could discover what was between us. Then I remembered his plan, Malcolm's. Malcolm ran his hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart shrink. Keisha called me weeks after the funeral, he explained. She told me about Marcus's plan, about the life insurance. I still refused. I didn't want to participate in that madness. But then what? Then my cancer came back, he said simply. Stage 4. The doctors gave me 6 months, a year at most, with no hope of cure this time. But that was 5 years ago, I observed. Yes, I participated in an experimental clinical trial. It worked better than anyone expected. I've been in complete remission for 4 years. When Malcolm improved, Keisha continued, we decided to give a chance to what Marcus had planned, not for money, but because we fell in love. I looked at the two of them, unable to believe the audacity. You betrayed my husband with my son. Then you betrayed my son with my husband. And now you're betraying my son with your husband's twin brother that no one knew existed. Keisha at least had the decency to look ashamed. I don't expect you to understand or forgive. And the life insurance, where did it go? It's in a frozen account, answered Malcolm. We never touched it. I know it seems impossible to believe, but we didn't do this for money. Then why? For a second chance, he said simply. For Keisha, for me. After almost dying twice, you see life differently. And what about my son and grandson? Don't they deserve a second chance, too? A life without lies? Keisha looked at her own hands. I'm going to leave Jamal soon. I've already started laying the groundwork. A friendly divorce, shared custody of Deshawn. But you're not going to tell him about Malcolm, about Marcus? No. She looked directly into my eyes. And I hope you won't tell him either. It was an absurd request. How could I keep such a monstrous secret? How could I look my son in the eye knowing what I knew? But then I remembered Marcus, the man I thought I knew for 40 years, the man who apparently lived a double life for years, planning to abandon me, fake his own death, start over without looking back. Had it been so easy for him? So easy to discard decades together? Did Marcus ever love me? The question escaped before I could contain it, exposing my vulnerability. Malcolm seemed genuinely distressed. I can't speak for his feelings. I only knew him for a year before his death, but he spoke of you with respect. Respect, not love, not nostalgia, not regret. Respect, the way you speak of a competent coworker. He was unhappy for years, Keisha added in a misguided attempt to soften the blow. He said that you two were together out of habit, not love. Her words hit me like a slap. I had loved Marcus every day of our life together, even during difficult times, even during fights, even during long, silent nights. I always loved him, and all that time to him I was just a habit. Are you going to the dinner tonight? I asked Keisha, abruptly changing the subject. She blinked, confused by the change. Yes, I'll be there at 7 with Jamal. And will you come back here after with Malcolm? She hesitated, then nodded. Jamal has an early meeting in Charlotte tomorrow. He's staying the night there. Deshawn is staying at a friend's house. I plan to come back here afterward. The calculated coldness with which she planned her betrayals made me sick. But then, who was I to judge? I had been equally blind, equally foolish. I need to think, I said finally, standing up, about all of this. Malcolm and Keisha exchanged glances again, that silent communication that excluded me. "Whatever you decide, we'll respect it," said Malcolm. "I just ask that you think about the consequences for everyone involved." I left the cabin without responding, my mind a whirlwind. In the car, I finally let the tears come. Tears for everything I had lost, for everything I never really had. Marcus never loved me the way I loved him. He planned to abandon me, and if he hadn't died, he would have disappeared from my life, leaving me forever with unanswered questions. I was the fool in this story, the naive old woman that everyone tricked. I drove back home mechanically, preparing myself for the dinner I would have to face in a few hours. A dinner where I would need to look my son in the eye, knowing what his wife was doing behind his back, knowing that in a matter of days his life would be turned upside down. While preparing the food, a terrible idea began to form in my mind, an idea born of pain and rage. If I couldn't have justice, maybe I could have something else. In the kitchen cabinet, behind the canned goods, was the old jar of sleeping pills. Strong pills the doctor prescribed to me after Marcus's death when sleep eluded me. Pills that in sufficient quantity could make someone sleep forever. I held the jar in my trembling hands, considering dark possibilities. It would be so easy. Some pills in Keisha's wine, an accidental overdose, sadness, but not surprise. After all, she'd been so disturbed lately. I opened the jar, poured some pills into my hand, small, white, harmless looking. They could resolve everything. They could avenge myself on Marcus, on Keisha, on all the lies. But then I thought of Jamal, of Deshawn, of their lives after another tragedy. I thought about the type of person I would become if I went down that path. With a trembling sigh, I put the pills back in the jar and the jar back in the cabinet. No, it wouldn't be that kind of justice I would seek. I wouldn't lower myself to that level. At 7 o'clock sharp, I heard Jamal's car arriving. I forced a smile, preparing for the performance of my life. I opened the door for my son and daughter-in-law, watching as Keisha maintained that perfect smile, as if she hadn't been in another man's arms just hours before. "Mom, are you okay?" Jamal asked, concerned. "You look pale." "Just a little tired," I replied, leading them to the dining room where the table was set. I had a hectic day. During dinner, I watched them. Jamal, kind and oblivious as always, talking about the property, about plans for the future that would soon be destroyed. Keisha, elegant and controlled, responding at just the right moments, smiling at just the right moments, the perfect actress. And me, the foolish widow who finally saw the truth. "How are things between you two?" I asked abruptly, interrupting Jamal in the middle of a story about the new tractor. He seemed confused by the interruption. Keisha froze momentarily, her wine glass halfway to her mouth. "How what, Mom? Your marriage. You seem like you barely see each other lately." Jamal shrugged, uncomfortable. "We're good. Busy, but good. Right, love?" Keisha smiled that perfect smile. "Of course, just normal phases of any marriage." "And are you happy, Jamal?" I insisted. "Truly happy." My son looked at me with growing concern. "Mom, what's going on? Why these questions?" I looked directly at Keisha while answering. "I just want to make sure my son is living the life he deserves with someone who truly loves and respects him." Keisha held my gaze, but I saw a flash of fear in her eyes. She knew I was issuing a warning. "Of course I am," answered Jamal, oblivious to the tension between his mother and his wife. "I have everything I need." He took Keisha's hand across the table, a gesture that probably felt natural to him. She smiled, but I saw how her fingers barely returned the touch, Dinner continued, conversation shifting to safer topics. When we finished dessert, Jamal announced they needed to leave. He needed to get up early for his trip to Charlotte. "Keisha, could you help me with the dishes before you go?" I asked. "Jamal, why don't you check that porch pipe I mentioned? It's leaking again." My son nodded and left, leaving me alone with Keisha in the kitchen. As soon as we heard the front door close, she turned to me. "What did you decide?" she asked, her voice low and tense. I began stacking the plates calmly. "You know, for years I believed I had a perfect marriage, that Marcus and I were happy, that I knew the man I shared my life with. Lorraine, but it was all a lie," I continued, ignoring her. "He never loved me the way I loved him. He was with me out of habit and planned to abandon me." Keisha remained silent, waiting. "I'm not going to tell Jamal about you and Malcolm," I said finally, "or about you and Marcus. Not because you deserve my discretion, but because my son doesn't deserve that kind of pain." She released a sigh of relief. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," I replied, facing her. "I'm going to let you tell him about the divorce in your own way. I'm going to let you build whatever narrative you want to explain why you're leaving your marriage. But if you hurt my son more than necessary, if you try to take Deshaun from him, if you cause any scandal that affects his reputation in this town, I will tell him everything, every sordid detail. Understood?" She nodded, pale, perfectly. And as for Malcolm, I felt a knot in my throat. Tell him he never, ever crosses my path again. Seeing his face is like seeing a ghost that reminds me of every moment I was deceived. "He'll understand," she whispered. Jamal returned at that moment, interrupting our conversation. "The pipe is fine now, Mom. It just needed a little tightening." "Thank you, honey." I forced a smile. As I walked them to the door, my heart ached for what was to come. Jamal would soon lose his wife. His world would be shaken, but he would survive. He was stronger than I had been. "Mom, are you sure you're okay?" Jamal asked at the door, concerned. "You seem different today." "Just tired," I repeated, hugging him tightly. "I love you, son, more than anything." "I love you too, Mom." Keisha gave me a quick mechanical hug, avoiding my eyes. I watched them getting into the car, driving away, the last image of the couple they pretended to be. When I went back inside, the house seemed emptier and quieter than ever. For 5 years I lived with the memory of a man I thought had loved me. Now even that had been taken from me. There was nothing to remember with affection, nothing to console me on lonely nights. I sat in Marcus's chair in the office, looking at the photos of our life together, every smile, every moment I believed was special, every anniversary, vacation, Christmas. Was it all a lie? Or was there truth hidden somewhere among the falsehoods? Perhaps I would never know. That night, for the first time in 5 years, I didn't cry for the loss of Marcus. Instead, I cried for the loss of the woman I had been, confident, loved, secure in her place in the world. That woman died today in the cabin by the lake, and in her place was born someone new, someone wiser, more cautious, someone who would never be deceived again. A week later, as she promised, Keisha told Jamal about the divorce. He appeared at my door that night, eyes red, face distraught. "She said she doesn't love me anymore," he murmured, sinking into the sofa. "She said we've been living a lie for years, that she doesn't want to waste her life anymore." I served him a generous dose of whiskey, the same kind his father used to drink. "I'm so sorry, son." "Did you know? Did you notice something was wrong?" I hesitated. What could I say? I suspected she wasn't happy, but no, I didn't know this was coming. "She wants shared custody of Deshaun. She said she's moving to Atlanta, that she has a job opportunity there. He downed the whiskey in one gulp. Who just decides to move to another state like that out of the blue? Someone who had already planned it long ago, I thought. Someone who already has a life waiting for her there. What will you do? He shook his head, lost. What can I do? I can't force her to stay. I can't force her to love me. And Deshawn, how is he handling this? Upset, confused. Keisha talked to him earlier today before talking to me. He laughed bitterly. She had everything planned. By the time I get home today, she'll be gone. She's staying at her sister's in Durham tonight. At least that's what she said. Was it her sister's house or the cabin in Malcolm's Arms? The rage bubbled inside me, but I repressed it. My son needed support now, not more pain. You can stay here tonight if you want. Your old room is always ready. He nodded, grateful. Thanks, Mom. I don't think I could sleep in that house today. That night I heard Jamal walking down the hallway, restless as he used to be when he was a teenager, and something was bothering him. I thought of Keisha, probably in Malcolm's Arms now, planning their new life together. I thought of Marcus, who died still planning his escape. And I thought of myself, carrying the weight of those secrets forever. In the weeks that followed, I watched my son navigate the painful process of divorce. Keisha kept her word. It was quick, amicable, without scandal. Jamal kept the house. She took her share in money, shared custody of Deshawn, with the boy spending most of his time with his father, since Keisha would be settling in Atlanta. She left on a Tuesday, exactly a month after I discovered the truth. She came to say goodbye, a gesture I considered more of a performance for an imaginary audience than genuine courtesy. Goodbye, Lorraine, she said at my door, perfectly arranged as always. Thank you for everything. Don't thank me, I replied coldly. Just go and don't hurt my family more than necessary. She nodded, a flash of guilt finally breaking through that perfect facade. I'll keep my word. Jamal and Deshawn will never know the truth. I watched her car drive away for the last time, feeling a strange relief. One part of the lie had finally ended, but the secret would continue with me forever. Jamal and Deshawn moved into my house in the weeks that followed. Temporarily, my son said, until we get used to the new situation. But I knew it was more than that. Their house was full of memories, of voids left by Keisha's departure. Seeing my grandson every day was a balm for my wounded soul. He was 13 now, the age when boys begin to pull away from their grandmother's hugs, but occasionally he still allowed me to hold him, especially on difficult days. Why did Mom leave? He asked one night while I helped him with math homework. How do you answer that? Sometimes people change, Deshawn. They make difficult decisions that they don't even fully understand themselves. She said she still loves me, that nothing will change between us. And she loves you, I'm sure of that. It was one of the few certainties I had about Keisha. Her love for Deshawn seemed genuine, even if everything else was a lie. I'm going to Atlanta next month, during summer vacation. She's already looking at schools for when I go live with her part-time. I nodded, pretending to support. It's going to be an adventure. Grandma, he hesitated, his young face worried. Mom said she has a special friend there, a special friend. I think that's why she left. I felt my heart shrink. What else did she say about that friend? Not much, just that they've known each other for a while, and that one day she'll introduce me to him. He frowned. Do you think she cheated on Dad? The innocent question caught me off guard. How I wished I could protect him from the harsh truth of adult relationships. Deshawn, relationships are complicated. Sometimes good people make wrong decisions, But what's important is that your parents love you, no matter what happens between them. He seemed to accept this vague answer, returning his attention to the homework. But I knew this wouldn't be the last time we'd face this issue. A month later, I received a call from Keisha. It was the first time we'd spoken since her departure. "Deshaun is coming to Atlanta tomorrow," she said without preamble. "Jamal will put him on the plane. He'll stay with me for 3 weeks." "I know." There was an awkward pause. "Malcolm and I think it would be better to postpone the introduction. Deshaun needs time to adjust to the separation before meeting someone else in my life." "Wise choice," I replied, not hiding the sarcasm. "Lorraine," her voice lowered, "I want you to know that we're moving further away. Malcolm received an offer in Memphis. We'll be more than 6 hours from Atlanta. And Deshaun, shared custody will continue as agreed. I'll make the trip when it's my time to have him. It's better that way. Less chance of complications." Complications. Such a polite word to describe the possibility of someone recognizing Malcolm as the identical twin of Marcus. "How is Jamal?" she asked, with what seemed to be genuine concern. "How do you think?" Devastated, confused, trying to understand where he went wrong in a marriage that, as far as he knew, was just going through a rough patch. She sighed. "I know you'll never believe it, but I really do care, and I never wanted to cause so much pain." "But you did anyway." Another silence. "You're right, and I'll have to live with that." She hesitated. "Just one more thing. The anniversary of Marcus's death is coming up. As always, we're going to visit the grave. I, Malcolm, wanted to know if it would be too painful for you if we left flowers, too. From a distance, of course, after you and Jamal have gone." The audacity left me momentarily speechless. "You're asking me for permission so the secret twin brother of my husband, with whom you're betraying my son, can leave flowers on the grave of the man who betrayed us all." "Forget it," she murmured. "It was a stupid idea." "Keisha," I said before she could hang up, "one last question. Did you ever really love Jamal?" There was a long pause. "In the beginning, yes. He was kind, stable, everything I thought I wanted, but then I met Marcus and it was different. More intense, more real." She sighed. "I don't expect you to understand or forgive. I just hope that someday you find peace." She hung up, and I was left staring at the silent phone. Peace, as if that were possible now. On the anniversary of Marcus's death, Jamal and I visited the cemetery as we always did. We brought flowers, lilies, his favorites, or at least the ones I always believed were his favorites. Now I doubted even that. We stood in silence in front of the headstone. What was really beneath that cold stone? The body of the man I loved and who betrayed me, or someone else, part of a scheme that never existed beyond Marcus's sick imagination? After Jamal walked away to take a turn around the cemetery, a ritual he'd developed over the years, a private moment to communicate with his father, I stayed alone with the headstone. "You lied to me our entire life together," I whispered to the cold marble. "You made me believe in a marriage that only existed in my head. You made me believe I was loved when really I was just convenient." Tears came, not from sadness but from rage. Rage for all the wasted years, for all the moments I thought were special and that meant nothing to him. "But you know something? I survived. I survived your betrayal, your death, the truth. And I'm going to keep surviving for Jamal, for Deshaun, for myself." Jamal returned, his eyes red from contained tears. I embraced him, feeling his large body tremble slightly. "I never understood why he was so distant sometimes," he murmured. "Why it seemed like there were parts of him I could never reach." Because there were, I thought, parts he kept for Keisha, for his secrets, for the life he planned to have away from us. He loved you in his own way, I replied, the bitter lie on my tongue. Another lie to protect my son. When we got back home, we found a wreath of flowers on the front door. Red roses, Marcus's favorites, as I knew, with no card, no identification. But I knew who had sent them. How strange, commented Jamal. Who would have sent them? Probably someone from town, I replied, taking the arrangement and setting it aside. You know how people remember him around this time of year? That night after Jamal and Deshawn were asleep, I took the roses and carried them to the patio. One by one, I tore off their petals and threw them into the fire I'd started in the old metal barrel. I watched them burn, feeling each flame like a small revenge against all who had betrayed me. When the last petal turned to ash, I felt something change inside me, a closure finally closing, a wound being cauterized. Marcus was dead. Whatever the truth about his life, it was buried with all its truths and lies. Keisha was far away with her lover, living with the consequences of her choices. And I was here, on the property I'd helped build, with my son and grandson, rebuilding a life from the pieces left by others. 2 years passed. Life on the property assumed a new rhythm. Jamal slowly began to recover, dedicating himself to the property and to Deshawn. The boy came and went from Atlanta as agreed, always returning with stories about his mother's new life, but never mentioning any special friend. Eventually, Jamal met Shanice, the new science teacher at Deshawn's school. She was different from Keisha in every way, warm, open, unpretentious. I watched their relationship bloom slowly with the caution of someone who had been deeply hurt. "Do you think I'm going too fast?" Jamal asked one night after mentioning that he'd invited Shanice to dinner with us. "No," I replied honestly. "I think you deserve to be happy, and she seems like a good person." "Different from Keisha," he murmured. "Yes, different from Keisha." I hesitated, then added, "Not all people are capable of loving the way we deserve, Jamal. That doesn't mean the problem is ours." He nodded thoughtfully. "You know, for years I blamed myself for Keisha's distance. I thought I wasn't good enough, that I didn't understand her well enough. Now I realize that some people are simply not made for love and loyalty." How I wished I could tell him that he was right, that Keisha had never been capable of truly loving, that she had betrayed not only him, but all of us. But I kept my secret as I had promised. "Shanice is coming to dinner tomorrow. I hope everything is okay." "Of course it is," I smiled. "I'm going to prepare that roast you love so much." Dinner with Shanice was pleasant, natural. She was an intelligent and kind woman, the type who spoke to adults and children in the same respectful way. I watched how she interacted with Deshawn, how she made him feel heard and important. "Your family is wonderful," she said later, while I served coffee on the porch. Jamal had gone inside to help Deshawn with a science project model. "Thank you. They're my life." She smiled, a genuine smile, with no calculations behind it. "Jamal talks a lot about you, about how you've been his refuge, especially since the divorce." I try to do my best. He told me about Marcus, too, about how he died suddenly. "It must have been terrible for you." I looked at the distant mountains bathed in the setting sun. It was. Losing someone you love is always terrible, but over time you learn to live with the pain, with the truth, however difficult it may be. Shanice seemed like the type of person who would never lie like Keisha, never betray like Marcus. Part of me wanted to warn her, protect her from what I knew about the fragility of relationships, about how people can hide entire parts of themselves behind smiles and promises. But she would need to discover that on her own, in her own way. One autumn afternoon, almost a year after discovering the truth about Marcus, I received a letter. The envelope had no return address, but the stamp was from Memphis. Inside, a brief note. Lorraine, Keisha wanted me to write to let you know that Deshawn met me last summer. She introduced me as a friend, nothing more. He didn't notice any resemblance to Marcus, probably because he was too young when he died. I also wanted you to know that we understand and respect your decision to keep our secret. I know I did nothing to deserve your discretion, but I am eternally grateful for it. Finally, I wanted to tell you that although I never really knew Marcus, I always felt there was a void in me that was only filled when I learned of his existence. I wish circumstances had been different, that we could have been a real family. Malcolm. I stared at the letter for a long time, emotions warring inside me, anger, sadness, a strange compassion for this man who was and wasn't my husband. Finally, I did what had to be done. I tore the letter into tiny pieces and burned them, just as I had done with the roses. Another chapter closed. That night, I dreamed of Marcus. Not the Marcus who betrayed me, but the man I believed he was throughout all those years. In the dream, we were young again, dancing at the old barn party where we met. He smiled at me, that smile that always made me feel like the only woman in the world. Were you real? I asked in the dream. Did the man I loved ever exist? The Marcus of my dream just continued smiling, spinning me in the dance without answering. And perhaps that was the hardest truth to accept. I would never know. I would never know if our entire marriage was a farce, or if there were real moments of love among the lies. I woke with tears in my eyes, but also with a strange sense of peace. Perhaps it didn't matter anymore. The past was buried along with all its truths and lies. What mattered was the future I still had ahead of me. 2 more years passed. Life on the property assumed a new rhythm. Jamal slowly began to recover, dedicating himself to the property and to Deshawn. The boy came and went from Atlanta as agreed, always returning with stories about his mother's new life, but never mentioning any special friend. Eventually, Jamal got married to Shanice in a simple ceremony in our garden. Deshawn, now 17, was a young man divided between 2 worlds, the quiet life on the property with his father and his new stepmother, and visits to Atlanta, and occasionally Memphis, to see Keisha. He rarely spoke about those visits when he returned, and I never pressed him. Part of me feared what he might eventually discover. Would he notice Malcolm's resemblance to the photos of Marcus that still adorned our house? Would he ask questions for which we had no honest answers? One summer evening, while we prepared dinner together, Deshawn finally broached the subject I most feared. "Grandma, do you know Malcolm?" My heart leaped, but I kept my face neutral while continuing to cut vegetables. "Malcolm, who is Malcolm?" "Mom's boyfriend. They've been together for a while. I thought maybe you knew him before." I chose my words carefully. "No, honey. I've never met any of your mother's friends in Memphis. He's nice to me. He knows quite a bit about farming. Actually, he says he grew up on a farm in Mississippi." Another lie, I thought. According to his story, Malcolm had grown up in Detroit. One more layer of falsehood in a life built on deceptions. "Mom seems happy with him," Deshawn continued. "Happier than she was with Dad, I think. People change, Deshawn. They find what they need at different times in their life." The words came out bitter, but I tried to soften them with a smile. "It's weird, but..." He hesitated. "Sometimes when I look at Malcolm, I'm reminded of someone. I can't figure out who." I froze. "Really?" "Yeah, I can't place it. It's just one of those random similarities, you know? He shrugged. Can I call Tyler so he can come over tomorrow? We promised to work together on the science project. I breathed a sigh of relief at the change of subject. Of course you can. That night, I couldn't sleep. Deshawn's words echoed in my mind. He was beginning to notice the resemblance. It was only a matter of time before he made the connection. What would happen then? Would he confront Keisha, Malcolm? Would he tell Jamal? The truth I had guarded so carefully for years could explode at any moment, causing even greater destruction than if I had revealed it from the beginning. The next morning, I woke determined to do something about it. I couldn't let Deshawn discover the truth on his own, without context, without preparation. It would be too devastating. I waited until Jamal and Shanice left for the city, and Deshawn was at a friend's house. Then I picked up the phone and dialed the number Keisha had left for emergencies. She answered on the third ring, her voice cautious. Lorraine, did something happen to Deshawn? No, he's fine, but we need to talk about Malcolm. Silence on the other end, then a sigh. What happened? Deshawn is starting to notice the resemblance. He told me last night that Malcolm reminds him of someone. He just can't figure out who. That was expected, she replied, her voice surprisingly resigned. He's growing, observing more, and Marcus's photos are all over your house. What are we going to do when he figures it out? When he asks why his mother's boyfriend looks exactly like his dead grandfather? We already thought about that, she hesitated. Malcolm and I, we have a story ready. What story could possibly explain that? A partial truth, that Malcolm is a distant relative of Marcus, a second cousin who I met by chance in Atlanta. The resemblance is explained by the relationship, and no one needs to know about the affair, about the full truth. And you think he's going to believe that? That Jamal is going to believe that? That's such a convenient coincidence? What's the alternative? Telling the whole truth now would only cause more pain. It would destroy the image Deshawn has of Marcus, the memory Jamal keeps of his father. What would be the point? She was right, much as I hated to admit it. Revealing everything now, after all this time, would bring no good, only more pain, more confusion. You should have thought about that before, I said bitterly. Before bringing Malcolm into Deshawn's life, before risking this whole situation. I know, but I can't change the past, Lorraine. I can only try to do better now. I hung up without saying goodbye, frustration consuming me. I was trapped in a web of lies I hadn't created, but of which I was now an accomplice. 2 weeks later, Jamal came home with an expression I hadn't seen since the divorce, a mix of shock, confusion, and anger. Mom, he said, his voice trembling. Keisha called. She wants to bring her boyfriend to meet the family on Deshawn's next visit. She says it's serious between them, that they might get married. I felt the blood drain from my face. And what did you say? What could I say? Deshawn seems to like the guy, and she has the right to move on. He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture so similar to Marcus that it made my heart shrink. It's just strange, you know, thinking about her with another man. I know, honey. I put my hand on his shoulder. When would they come? Next month for Deshawn's birthday. She wants us to be civilized, a big, happy, and dysfunctional family. He laughed without humor. A month. I had a month to prepare myself for the inevitable, to officially meet Malcolm Washington, the twin brother of my dead husband, the man who was now with my son's ex-wife. Are you okay with that, Mom? I know it must be strange for you, too. Of course, I lied. Like you said, we all move on. In reality, I was terrified. How would I react when I saw Malcolm in person again? How would I manage to keep my composure? Pretend I was meeting him for the first time when his face had haunted me for years. When the day finally came, I spent hours preparing myself mentally, rehearsing smiles, handshakes, educated conversations, everything to avoid the collapse I feared. Deshaun was excited about his birthday, running around the house checking the preparations. Jamal and Shanice were in the kitchen finishing the cake. I was on the porch, trying to calm my nerves, when I heard the car arriving. The silver sedan parked and Keisha got out first, impeccable as always. And then he got out. Malcolm, older now, more gray but still impossibly similar to Marcus. He wore a simple blue shirt and jeans, the kind of clothes Marcus wore on weekends on the property. My stomach churned at the sight. Deshaun ran to hug his mother and shake hands enthusiastically with Malcolm. Jamal appeared in the doorway, took a deep breath, and walked out to greet them. Shanice just behind, supporting him silently. And then it was my turn. "Lorraine," said Keisha formally, "this is Malcolm Davis. Malcolm, this is Lorraine, Jamal's mother." Malcolm extended his hand, his face a mask of polite indifference, as if we were, indeed, meeting for the first time. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Mrs. Washington. Keisha and Deshaun speak very highly of you." I shook his hand briefly, feeling like I was in a surreal nightmare. "Welcome to our home," his eyes, Marcus's eyes, met mine for a moment. Was there a silent plea for forgiveness there, or just my desperate imagination seeking some sign of remorse? Jamal looked at Malcolm with curiosity, but without recognition. Why should he? The last time he had seen his father clearly, Malcolm was weakened by cancer, much thinner and paler than Marcus had ever been. "Let's go inside," I said finally, breaking the tense moment. Deshaun is anxious to open his presents. The afternoon unfolded like a carefully rehearsed play, where everyone had their parts. Keisha, the cordial ex-wife; Jamal, the mature ex-husband; Shanice, the understanding new wife; Malcolm, the polite new boyfriend; me, the gracious hostess. Only Deshaun was genuine, moving among all of us with the energy of his 17 years, unaware of the underlying tension. At one point, I found myself alone with Malcolm in the kitchen. He was washing some glasses while I put away food leftovers. The silence was deafening. "Are you all right?" he asked finally, his voice low so no one else could hear. "What an absurd question," I replied without looking at him. How could I be all right with all of this? "I know it's difficult for everyone, for all of you." I turned, unable to contain my anger. "You and Keisha chose this. Jamal, Deshaun, and I are just trying to survive the consequences of your choices." He lowered his head. "You're right. I have no excuses to offer." He hesitated, then continued. "But I want you to know that I take good care of Keisha and Deshaun when he's with us. I know it means nothing to you, but I try to be a better man than my brother was." "You never really knew Marcus," I replied coldly. "You don't know what kind of man he was." "I know enough." His eyes, Marcus's eyes, met mine again. "I know that he betrayed you. I know he betrayed his own son. I know he planned to abandon them. I know he didn't value what he had. And you're so different, getting involved with your nephew's wife." He had no answer for that. We returned silently to the living room, where Deshaun was enthusiastically opening his gifts. I watched Jamal throughout that afternoon, searching for any sign that he noticed something strange about Malcolm. But he seemed genuinely oblivious, treating Keisha's new boyfriend with polite distance, nothing more. When the party ended and everyone prepared to leave, Jamal surprised us all. "Keisha, Malcolm, could you stay a bit longer? There's something I'd like to discuss." My heart raced. He knew. He had found out somehow. Keisha looked equally alarmed. Of course, Jamal. What happened? He looked at Deshawn, who was animatedly talking with Shanice on the other side of the room. It's about Deshawn, actually. The school. I received a call from the counselor yesterday. Relief was immediate. It was just about Deshawn, about school, nothing about Malcolm, about secrets, about betrayals from the past. While the three of them discussed Deshawn's grades, his plans for college, his recent teenage rebellion, I watched Malcolm. He was completely at ease, voicing opinions about education, about discipline, as if he had the right to participate in those family decisions, as if he was part of the family. And then something terrible occurred to me. He was part of the family. In a distorted and perverted way, Malcolm was as connected to us as anyone. Marcus's blood ran through his veins. He was Jamal's uncle.